We talked about the Great Awakening, which is the revival of religion, causing people to want to change society for the better. The Enlightenment, this is important because this is going on from 1600s, some will say to the 1800s, some say just to about the 1750s. The Enlightenment really takes off and stems from Europe, but we do have a couple Enlightenment thinkers. Ben Franklin is one of them. And a lot of our founding fathers, the reason why this is an important section is because our founding fathers, and I don't mean this in a negative way, steal the ideas from Europe to help incorporate these ideas into our government, the US Constitution later on. So, James Madison, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, all of these great minds were educated with ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers. The Enlightenment thinkers in Europe were revolutionary of their time period because you have to understand Europe's being run by kings and queens who oftentimes have absolute rule or absolute power over their area. And some of the Enlightenment thinkers started to question whether that should continue, whether two people or one person should have absolute power. And they started to question how their government was being run and what society should look like. And so we have taken these ideas, the United States of America has taken these ideas and made them our own. So we are really amazing at plagiarizing, which is not a good thing, but in this case, we'll say it is. So we do have the Enlightenment period, which is a focus on education. We want more people to be enlightened, to be educated. This is not a religious thing. And a look at philosophy and ideas. First one we're going to talk about is John Locke. Very famous and revolutionary of his time. They say he's the father of liberalism because his ideas at the time were incredibly liberal. The fact that we were all born with natural rights of life, liberty, and property, that's pretty revolutionary, considering at the time the monarch, the king and queen, could take away that life. A duke or lord could, take your property. So, feudalism is over, but, the common people still don't have a lot of rights. Even the middle class don't have a lot of rights, which would be like merchants. So John Locke was very famous for his social contract theory, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And his other big thing was, other than life, liberty, and property, which you do see, where we all have these unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that comes from John Locke's idea. The other idea is to observe and experiment with the universe, and that's how you learn best. And I made the reference of, if you observe that a stove is hot, and when you touch it, it's hot, and that's your experimenting, and so from this point on, don't touch a hot stove. Things like that, which is true. So John Locke's social contract theory, and this is Locke, not Hobbes. We're not talking about Thomas Hobbes, even though he's in your reading. So John Locke's social contract theory is very simple. The idea is the American people, or people in general, choose the government. If the government does not do their job, the people then have the right to remove that government and replace it. You can talk about this with recall votes that we have when we remove governors. You can talk about it when we have steps to impeach congressmen or presidents. We do follow the social contract theory because here in the United States, we elect our government officials. If we think they're doing a horrible job or they are not cutting it, we can actually remove them. It's rare that this happens because it is a longer process to remove them, but it has happened. So we do have that right. It's just whether we practice it or not. That is a social contract theory of John Locke. The other person that we're going to talk about is Montesquieu. So a lot of these people were French. Voltaire we're not going to talk about, but he was also a big Enlightenment thinker. A lot of people read Voltaire. If you go to college, you may read him. I had to read him. But the person we're focusing on is Montesquieu. His idea was that we should be free from royal absolutism. Absolutism is the idea of absolute power. And he wants to be free from the idea that the king and queen have the absolute power to control everything, to send you to the guillotine, to punish you, to do different things, to send people to war. He wants to be free from that. Obviously very revolutionary, especially if you're a king or queen of France. You probably don't like Montesquieu too much. He doesn't say get rid of the king and queen. He just says that there should be a different way that we look at it. His other big thing that we steal is that he called for a separation and balance of powers. So obviously today we don't have a king and queen. We're free from royal absolutism. Also today we have three branches of government: executive, legislative, judicial. They all have different roles. They all balance each other out. We also have a national government, a state government, and a local government. So you have a president, a governor, and a mayor. You have all these different branches that are working to balance the power of each other, but they also can work individually. And so we have stolen this idea from Montesquieu. Maybe other people as well, but we'll credit Montesquieu. Our third person is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And his big idea was that our community should be based on common values and attitudes. Most Americans, I would say, agree that we should have freedom of speech and press. That's a common value. Freedom of assembly, that's a common value. Right to bear arms, even though that's very disputed. Many people feel that we should have that right. Others, especially after the Newtown and the other shootings that have been going on, will dispute that. But a lot of what's in our Constitution is based on this. And even this goes to the fact that the American people choose the president. That's a common attitude. Um, that the president should only rule for this amount of time. That's a common value that we share. So we do follow this. We also follow the idea that we should all be equal, even though it's taken us a very long time to get where we are today, and we know that inequality still exists. Education enlightenment. How does it impact the colonies? Well, like I said, our founding fathers study these people. They study their readings. They take these ideas. Well, what it does is it actually encourages more education throughout the colonies. New England is a prime example. High level of literacy, meaning the ability to read and write, is happening in New England. That's in the Puritan colonies. Even still today, Massachusetts is kind of a front runner for educational reform. What does a New England school look like? Well, this is straight actually from your homework, but I just wanted to reiterate. Massachusetts actually passes a law in 1647. So Massachusetts General School Act is what it says. If you have a town of 50 or more people, you have to provide a teacher. If you have a town of 100 or more, you have to provide not only a teacher, but a Latin grammar school. It's like a secondary school or perhaps a junior high. So they definitely encourage people. The people would help, the people of the town would actually provide money for these things, for the teacher or the secondary school. It shows that there is an emphasis on education and they take it seriously in New England. Now, what does education look like in colonial America? New England Primer, for example, you can just look at that really quickly. But this is oftentimes if you were learning to read or write, you'd have some biblical text in there, and a lot of it would be rhyming. So what does education look like in the South? So New England's very, very innovative, focuses on education. It's a smaller area, and the population is more condensed or dense. Southern colonies, plantation owners, people are more spread out. So the schools are few and far between. If you lived in like Charleston, South Carolina, you would have some schools. But if you lived 100 miles away from the nearest city, you're not going to have a school just for your children or your neighbor's children. So less education in the southern colonies. If you had enough money, you would hire a tutor, or in this case, you would hire an indentured servant to work with your children for 2, 7 years, however long, to teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic, the basics. Sometimes we get together with neighboring plantations as well, and you would both work with that same tutor. The other big thing, if you could afford it, was to send your child to England for schooling. This is because many Southerners view themselves as the aristocracy, the nobility of the South, of the colonies. And so if you are the aristocracy, you continue to send your children to, of course, the cream of the crop, the best schools in England, because that's what the nobles in England would do. Education, the middle colonies, you do have schools there. Eventually, you have a significant amount of German population that will come in there. That's where the idea of kindergarten comes from Germany. And so it kind of was just situational depending on the area. Quakers obviously have schools. Think of this Friends schools that you have seen or we talked about today. And of course, almost every school, whether you're talking about New England, middle colonies, or southern colonies, are going to be have a religious influence to it. Dame schools, this is run by typically either a widow or a spinster. That means a woman who's not married. Oftentimes it's a younger, she'll be working with younger kids, but at times it can also be a finishing school. So dame school is kind of a catch-all for women who are working to make a living by providing some sort of education to children. Like I said, sometimes depending on where you were, it would be a finishing school where you learned your manners, your etiquette, how to curtsy, things like that. I'm going to stop there.